knock you right in the head. You better get yourself together.
What if the world's most iconic musicians weren't just geniuses, but actual psychopaths? From violent outbursts to shocking crimes, these artists have darker secrets than their lyrics reveal. Let's dive into the shocking truth behind their fame. 25. Simon Le Bon.
Please welcome Simon Le Bon.
It's not the impact. I mean, yes, it is, but really, for us, it's the music that's the most important thing.
Every day I spend my time drinking wine, feeling fine.
Duran Duran's frontman has always been more than just a pretty face. His level of cockiness? Off the charts. Duran Duran were never a band to suffer from doubt and insecurity.
Stand, yes I am, in the days between the hours.
And we've got a big house, and we don't like having empty rooms, you know? We like filling them up with people.
At the band's first gig, he told the audience, "We're Duran Duran, and we want to be the band to dance to when the bomb drops." And he was also the man who asked this question of the ecologically conscious crowd at the 2007 Live Earth concert. Everyone who did not arrive on a private jet, put your hands in the air.
Is maybe, I think you're up there in the, up there with Billy Joel in the lyrics we get wrong.
Okay.
He's also blessed with a Noel Gallagher-style turn of phrase, if this deathless moment of pure cockiness from Rolling Stone is any measure. Quote, "I'm not a snob, ask anybody. Well, anybody who matters," end quote. 24. Prince. Prince had confidence that made him walk away from the king of pop. But what was the deal breaker? Prince didn't give a huge amount of interviews, preferring to let his music do the talking, but the ones he did give illuminated the degree of self-belief he amassed in order to be the performer he was.
I go out every night and sleep all day.
Birthdays did you have? One. You had one day of birth.
Reflecting on his early years in 1996, he told NME, "I had a massive ego. Massive. But that's not such a bad thing, because at least you're aspiring to be something. You consider yourself great because you want to be great." Perhaps the finest example of Prince's Herculean levels of self-belief occurred on the set of Michael Jackson's Bad video. Prince was originally slated to appear as the leader of a rival gang to Michael's, but he walked away for one very specific reason, as he explained in a TV interview with comedian Chris Rock. "You know that Wesley Snipes character? That would have been me. Now you run that video in your mind. The first line in that song is, 'Your butt is mine.' Now, I said to Michael, who's gonna sing that to whom? 'Cause you sure ain't singing it to me, and I sure ain't singing it to you, so right there we got a problem." 23. Chuck Berry.
Thank you.
Chuck Berry may have invented rock and roll, but he also had a disturbing criminal record. Here's why he was feared. Chuck Berry was a legend who helped shape rock and roll. The New Yorker described him as a proud and difficult man who was also a genius. He also once punched Keith Richards in the mouth for touching his guitar while they were getting together to organize Barry's 60th birthday party. It started when, as a teenager, he did 3 years in a reform school for stealing cars and armed robbery.
Ring goes the bell. They're cooking the lunch ready to sell. Passing by, they would stop and say, "Oh my, that little country boy can play." I say no.
Fast forward to 1962, he took a woman across state lines with immoral intentions. Oh, and the woman/girl was 14 years old. And the hits just kept on coming.
The feeling is there, body and soul. Thank you.
In December 1989, Barry was accused of videotaping women in the bathroom of one of his restaurants. The following June, his property was raided, with law enforcement finding weapons, pot, and the videotapes in question, placing him at the center of a class action lawsuit. 22. Miles Davis. Miles Davis wasn't just a musical genius, his dark personal life will shock you. The way he treated women is unthinkable. If there was ever a human being who embodied the spirit of music, that human was Miles Davis, and the spirit was jazz. But he was also such a horrible human. First, let's mention the fact he used to play with his back to his fans, and God help anyone who was brazen enough to walk up to him. There was the insane vanity, to the point where he condemned music critics for writing pieces that sang the praises of anyone else, claiming they were just out to take away his spotlight. Then there were the heroin and cocaine addictions, stories of pimping, and his abusive relationships with the women he married. He admitted to the whole sordid trend of beating his wives, and even admitted he approved of other men hitting their wives and girlfriends to keep them in line. 21. Phil Spector.
Find the defendant, Philip Spector, guilty of the crime of second-degree murder of Lana Clarkson.
Phil Spector's musical innovations are legendary, but behind closed doors, he was a monster. You won't believe how far he went. In the early years of the 60s, there were few musicians more respected for pushing the bounds of what pop could do than Phil Spector.
That's what the word genius is. Maybe that's the genie in us, the gene in us.
But along with Spector's fame and success came a reputation for erratic behavior within the industry, including allegations from the musicians involved of Spector using a gun in multiple recording sessions while working with the Ramones, John Lennon, and Leonard Cohen, who claimed that Spector threatened him.
There was an old letter from BMI, and inside was a check for $22,000.
There were also revelations of abuse from his former wife, Ronette star Ronnie Spector, who recalled that Spector threatened to kill her and even installed a coffin in the basement of their compound to prove his threats were genuine.
Never should be attributed to the title, The Wall of Sound. It was just a...
What Spector was capable of became headline news in February 2003 when it was announced that the body of 40-year-old model Lana Clarkson had been discovered at Spector's home. She had been shot.
Not being as any holier than thou,
After trial, an appeal, and a subsequent retrial, Spector was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. 20. John Lennon.
Gonna knock you right on the head. You better get yourself together.
John Lennon may have preached peace, but his personal life was far from serene. His darker side will leave you speechless. The best lead singers undercut the arrogance needed in order to do the job with a tiny smidge of self-effacing humor just to prove they have their feet on the ground some of the time.
Laughing in the face of love. What on earth you trying to do? Living life in peace. 3,000 miles.
John Lennon had more reason than most to consider himself a cut above, and one of the ways he got this across, just like his fellow Beatles, was to remain unsentimental about everything, even claiming in a 1980 Playboy interview, "I am only interested in what I am doing now." He added, "I'm not judging whether I Am the Walrus is better or worse than Imagine. That is for others to judge. I am doing it. I do. I don't stand back and judge. I do."
I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the Love has old.
In an infamously scathing interview with Rolling Stone in 1970, he delivered what appears to be a fairly definitive and very characterful mission statement on his right to create and perform. "When I was about 12, I used to think I must be a genius, but nobody noticed.
Alright. You may say I'm a dreamer. 1,000 light years from the land of the morning star.
Either I'm a genius or I'm mad. Which is it?" "No," I said, "I can't be mad because nobody's put me away. Therefore, I'm a genius. Genius is a form of madness, and we're all that way. But I used to be coy about it, like my guitar playing. But if there's such a thing as genius, I am one. And if there isn't, I don't care." 19. Gene Simmons. Kiss may have been larger than life, but Gene Simmons' ego could fill a stadium on its own. What he says about his band will blow your mind. Kiss have a lot going for them. The iconic image, some superb songs, a show which is all explosions and glitter, and all the better for it. But to hear bass player and demon Gene Simmons talk, you'd think they were the reason music was first invented. He has strong views on the band's cultural impact, telling The Guardian, "There are a lot of famous bands. Kiss had become a culture, had become iconic. There were holidays when people dressed like us. Nobody takes Bono's face and tattoos it on their ass." And telling Time magazine he's not concerned about the haters. Kiss has never looked over its shoulder to see who liked us and who doesn't. Not everyone liked Jesus either. 18. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra may have been the king of cool on stage, but his violent temper offstage was legendary. His outbursts were pure terror. Frank Sinatra was iconic on stage, but there was a lot of shady stuff that happened offstage. Let's talk about one part of that: his temper. It was so bad that one of his wives once described him as a sort of Jekyll and Hyde character, and there's a whole list of physical altercations he was involved in. First, the ones where someone got seriously hurt. He punched a reporter in 1948, eventually settling the assault and battery charges filed against him. He was staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel when he threw a phone at a random businessman who was also there and cracked the man's skull. He nearly killed his then-wife Ava Gardner by throwing a champagne bottle at her so hard it cracked the bathroom sink. Sinatra destroyed an insane amount of stuff too, usually in fits of rage. He took a knife to a Norman Rockwell painting and shredded it, threw a malfunctioning TV out a window at Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, and smashed a car radio when the Doors' Light My Fire came on. GQ says some of the stuff that met an untimely end under his boot were pretty priceless too, like the Ming vase he destroyed at a Hong Kong hotel after someone missed a lighting cue. That's what happens when you get too used to having things your way. 17. Richard Wagner. Richard Wagner's music was legendary, but his views on race were sinister. His legacy is tainted by his shocking anti-Semitic beliefs. Richard Wagner died in 1883, decades before the rise of Hitler and his Nazis. That means he wasn't around to see his music heralded as the soundtrack of the rise of modern anti-Semitism, but he probably wouldn't have hated the association. Wagner got more and more vocal about his anti-Semitic views as he got older. He wrote a ton of jaw-dropping stuff, believing Jews couldn't produce art, only mimic what they'd seen and heard from others. When he struggled as an up-and-coming composer, he blamed Jewish critics for keeping him from success. Later, he did form associations with Jewish philosophers and patrons, but that led into his other bit of shadiness. 16. Steven Tyler. Steven Tyler wasn't just an iconic rocker. His personal life veers into some very dark territory. His relationship with an underage girl is disturbing. There are two sides to every story, and really, both sides to this one are uncomfortable. When Aerosmith frontman Steven Tyler wrote his 2011 memoir, Does the Noise in My Head Bother You?, he talked a bit about early girlfriend Julia Holcomb, and managed to misspell her name in the book's acknowledgments, notes the Boston Globe. Tyler wrote he had nicknamed her Little Bo Peep, said they liked to get it on in public, and left out a lot of the other details. Holcomb wanted to clear the air about what she says really happened, so she took to LifeSite to tell her side of the story. According to her, she was a 16-year-old from a broken family when she met Tyler and kicked off a relationship with him that really started when her troubled mother signed documents making Tyler her legal guardian. Holcomb says she was already pregnant by the time he asked her to marry him, and plans for a family started to fall apart when his grandmother refused to pass on her ring. 5 months into the pregnancy, Holcomb was trapped in a house fire and sent to the hospital, where she says Tyler convinced her to have an abortion. Jezebel notes that he also talks about it in Walk This Way, Aerosmith's autobiography. Holcomb left him. He had already moved on to other women and returned to her parents. 15. Morrissey. Morrissey's biting wit is legendary, but so is his ability to offend entire swaths of people. His ego and misanthropy are next level. Morrissey takes a strangely self-effacing tack in the lead singer's stakes. While absolutely assured of his own worth and abilities, he corrected Russell Brand in a 2006 TV interview when he'd made reference to a performance saying, "I don't perform, SEALs perform." Any public comment on his impact on the world is masked by whoppish commentary on the uselessness of most other pop performers and the need to stand out. In the 2003 documentary, The Importance of Being Morrissey, he said, "I left my fingerprints somewhere. That's good enough. I am my own person. That's good enough. I stand my ground. That's good enough." 14. Madonna. Madonna declared she'd rule the world, and she did, but her path to stardom was full of shocking controversies that cemented her fearlessness. It's easy to be cocky when you're just getting started. So when Madonna was asked on American Bandstand in 1983 what her ambitions might be, she replied, "To rule the world." The remarkable thing is that she succeeded, and on her own terms. In 1991, during the period where she was unassailably the queen of pop, she told Vanity Fair, "I am my own experiment. I am my own work of art." And by the time the dust had settled on her peak provocations, like 1992's Sex Book, she remained defiant, telling Spin magazine, "Better to live 1 year as a tiger than 100 as a sheep." 13. Jerry Lee Lewis. Jerry Lee Lewis had all the vices, but the details of his life go beyond scandal. His disturbing marriages and crimes are mind-boggling. Talking about the sins and vices of Jerry Lee Lewis is a little difficult for one simple reason. He had pretty much all of them. He changed the face of rock and roll, he helped shape decades of music, and he also had a ton of shadiness in his past. Lewis had 7 wives, and 2 died mysteriously, one by drowning and one by overdose. The latter incident went to court, where Lewis was ultimately cleared of wrongdoing. But the law was not on his side after he shot his bass player in the chest and had to pay out $125,000. Lewis's 7th marriage was to the ex-sister-in-law of his 3rd wife, the most infamous. Myra was 13 years old and the daughter of Lewis's cousin. Oh, and Medium says he was still technically married to his 2nd wife at the time. Lewis died in October 2022 at the age of 87. 12. Brian Jones. Brian Jones's troubled life was cut short, but not before he became notorious for his violent streak and troubled personal life. Brian Jones died when he was 27, and when Rolling Stone reported on the mysterious circumstances of his death, they did it in an article subtitled "Sympathy for the Devil." That's not just a clever play on one of the Stones' songs. Jones made Keith Richards look like the one you'd choose to bring home to meet your parents. There were, of course, the drugs and the pills that ultimately led him to parting ways with the rest of the band not long before his drowning death. His trouble started long before that, though, and he was kicked out of his grammar school for inciting rebellion. Behind closed doors, he had a violent streak a mile long. Anita Pallenberg was one of the original muses for the Stones, and she'd eventually go on to have a long-term relationship with Richards. But she started out with Jones, says Rolling Stone, and it was an abusive relationship that ended when Jones hit her so hard he broke his hand on her face. Sympathy for the devil, indeed. 11. Michael Brewer. Michael Brewer's musical career was filled with accolades, but what happened behind closed doors led to one of the darkest scandals ever. Chetham's School of Music is a prestigious school in Manchester, and until 1994, the director of music there was Michael Brewer. Brewer, who was also the director of the National Youth Choir and was awarded an OBE for his services to music, was handed a jail sentence of 6 years in 2013. The charge was sexual abuse, and the story gets even darker. It started for Frances Andrade when she was 14 years old. Brewer was her teacher and repeatedly assaulted her between 1978 and 1982. Brewer's then wife Hillary was also involved in the assault and was arrested, charged, and convicted separately. None of this came to light until years later, and when it did, law enforcement stumbled into other complaints that had been covered up, and another affair with a 17-year-old student. Several of the charges against Brewer and his ex-wife were dropped mid-trial. Only 6 days after hearing that news, Andrade died by suicide. Even as the judge declared Brewer to be a predatory sex offender, law enforcement was still tracking down former students and taking more statements about all that had gone on behind the orchestra curtain. 10. Grace Jones. Grace Jones is known for her style and fierceness, but her biting words and ironclad ego set her apart in an almost terrifying way. "I'm not fashion, I'm style" is one of the pithiest and most correct things ever to fall out of a pop star's mouth. Grace Jones said that to Vogue Italia, and it's one of many stern missives she has directed at the wider world, all of which insist that this is someone who is not to be trifled with. Her autobiography is even called "I'll Never Write My Memoirs," and it is chock full of cocky wisdom of the sort that belongs on fridge magnets, such as, "If you are lonely when you are alone, you are in bad company." And "One boyfriend told me that I loved myself too much. I thought, well, you can love a boyfriend too much, but you can't love yourself too much. Sometimes you have to love yourself to keep yourself whole." 9. Kanye West. Kanye West's genius is undeniable, but so is his notorious ego. His jaw-dropping proclamations have made him one of music's most controversial figures. "I opened the debate," Kanye said on Twitter in 2013. "The second verse of New Slaves is the best rap verse of all time," meaning of all time in the history of rap music, period. That's a surprisingly measured statement from a man seemingly incapable of resisting any opportunity for hyperbole, though he's since deleted it. For example, during a 2009 episode of the VH1 show Storytellers, he starts with a relatively humble thought, then completes it with some superb mirror kissing. "God chose me. He made a path for me. I am God's vessel. But my greatest pain in life is that I will never be able to see myself perform live." And while there's no shortage of further examples of his colossal confidence, the full essence of his self-regard in flight is apparent in this excitable claim to sway on SiriusXM in 2013. "I am Warhol. I am the #1 most impactful artist of our generation. I am Shakespeare in the flesh, Walt Disney, Nike, Google." 8. James Levine. James Levine was the face of the Metropolitan Opera, but his secret life exposed a pattern of abuse that shocked the music world. You can't get much bigger than the Metropolitan Opera, and for more than 40 years, conductor James Levine was at the head of it. He sported titles like Director Emeritus and worked with the company's Young Artist program as artistic director. The last one is particularly creepy given that the New York Times announced in March 2018 that the Met was officially and loudly ending its association with him amid accusations of sexually abusive and harassing conduct. Not a lot of details were released, but sometimes just a few details are enough. The Met's investigation involved interviews with 70 people, and it ended with an official statement saying that there was credible evidence that Mr. Levine engaged in sexually abusive conduct toward vulnerable artists in the early stages of their careers. Levine denied the accusations then, but things started looking very, very bad with the revelation it wasn't the first time he'd been accused of that sort of thing. There were rumors of abuse as far back as the 1960s when Levine was working at the Meadowbrook School of Music. 7. Spade Cooley. Spade Cooley was the king of Western swing, but his violent temper and shocking crime left a scar on his musical legacy. Spade Cooley was born in 1910, so you get a pass if you're not incredibly familiar with his name. He was huge in the 1950s, declared he was the king of Western swing, led a 30-piece band, hosted his own TV show, and made appearances in more than 50 movies. He's even got a star on Hollywood Boulevard, and you may have had a better chance of remembering him if his career hadn't been derailed by alcohol, pills, jealousy, and murder. Weirdly, he was the one who filed for divorce from his second wife, Ella May. According to Taste of Country, they were on the verge of getting back together when he killed her on April 3rd, 1961. Believe it or not, it gets worse. The murder wasn't just incredibly violent, but he did it in front of their 14-year-old daughter, Melody. He also reportedly put a cigarette out on her to make sure she was dead, then sat around in bloody clothes for a few hours before finally calling someone. 6. Alexander Scriabin. Alexander Scriabin's music was unique, but his belief that he was the Messiah will shock you. His story only gets stranger. Alexander Scriabin was a Russian composer who, according to the Julian calendar, was born on Christmas Day. He eventually came to see that as a bit of extra proof that he was the Messiah. Scriabin was brilliant but troubled. His hands were too small for him to play some of the piano pieces he wanted to, so he practiced until they broke, and kept practicing until the bones stretched enough that he could reach the keys. That's the kind of personality we're talking about here. After he got interested in religious philosophy and the occult, he became more and more convinced he was destined to change the world. And by change, he meant bring about the end times. 5. Noel Gallagher. Noel Gallagher wasn't just confident, He made sure everyone knew just how brilliant he thought he was. His ego had no limits. "I talk the talk," Noel Gallagher recently told Mike on Much podcast, "and I only talk the talk because I knew I could back it up." And people would say, "These fucking arrogant fuckers." And I'd say, "Yeah, I've just written a song called Champagne Supernova, so..." Which, if anything, underplays the extent to which Noel talked the talk. He told The Observer in 1995 Oasis were on a mission. "All I ever wanted to do was make a record. Here's what you do. You pick up your guitar, you rip a few people's tunes off, you swap them around a bit, get your brother in the band, punch his head in every now and again, and it sells." And he's more than happy to let everyone know he achieved his aim. In 2006, he told The Guardian, "Look, I was a superhero in the 90s. I said so at the time. McCartney, Weller, Townsend, Richards, my first album's better than all their first albums. Even they'd admit that." 4. Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash's song spoke to pain and redemption, but his treatment of women was a far cry from the Man in Black we all loved. There's a lot of dark stuff in Johnny Cash's life, but let's talk about how horrible he was to women. Vivian Cash's book, I Walk the Line, was a heartbreaking tell-all detailing how she continued loving her husband, even through the drugs and the affair with his more famous second partner, June Carter Cash. It was Vivian who gave him 4 daughters, raised them, and stuck with him through the worst of the arrests and the accidental forest fires, but Johnny gave all the credit to June. Behind closed doors, June Carter didn't actually have it any easier, in spite of the storybook romance performed for the public. Biographer Robert Hilburn, via Esquire, says he was stunned when he found out Cash had cheated on her when she was pregnant with son John Carter. There were many women, but the most painful was probably June's own sister, Anita. 3. CeeLo Green. CeeLo Green's music was all over the radio, but behind the scenes, his reputation plummeted after some shocking criminal charges. CeeLo Green hit something of a rough patch in 2012 and 2013, and it gets a little complicated. His troubles only started when he was accused of both giving a woman ecstasy and later raping her. Green ultimately pleaded no contest to the drug felony and got 3 years of probation, along with 45 days of community service. The rape charges simply went away because Green's lawyer argued there was no proof it wasn't consensual. That's skeevy, and it gets worse. Green took to Twitter to voice his opinions on rape, and saying they're horrible opinions is a huge understatement. He wrote, "People who have really been raped remember, and if someone is passed out, they're not even with you consciously. So with implied consent." 2. Johnny Paycheck. Johnny Paycheck's outlaw image wasn't just for show. His real-life crimes, including attempted murder, took country's bad boy to the next level. Johnny Paycheck was one of the Grand Ole Opry's most respected members, and an icon who helped build country music. He was known as something of a country music outlaw too, and his entire career was colored by drug and alcohol misuse. His difficulty staying out of trouble started way before he was a star though, and when he was still a teenager he enlisted in the US Navy, punched a superior officer, and spent a few years in prison. The record deal came after that, and so did the check forgery and the attempted murder. That happened on December 19th, 1985, says Rolling Stone. Paycheck was on his way home for the holidays when he stopped off at a Hillsboro, Ohio bar for a drink. He was recognized by a local named Larry Wise. They got to chatting and no one's entirely sure what happened next. Whatever offenses were caused, it ended with Paycheck pulling out a gun and shooting. The bullet grazed Wise's head, and he later testified the music legend had blowed my hat off. 1. Peter McNeel. Peter McNeel's crimes are so horrifying that they've overshadowed his entire career. The details of what he did will leave you in shock. Cake is one of those groups you probably forgot you used to listen to all the time. But before you go back and dig out your CDs, let's talk about what drummer Peter McNeel has been up to. McNeel, who was also the drummer for Norah Jones, made Rolling Stone headlines in 2014 for one of the most despicable reasons you can imagine. The verdict of his court case was in, and he was sentenced to 15 years to life in jail and was a permanent addition to the sex offender registry. Noisy said it wasn't just because of a single incident either. The details are way too terrible to repeat. So let's just say one incident happened while he was volunteering at a school in Los Angeles. Another one of his victims was only 3 years old at the time, and that's as terrible as it gets. Thanks for watching. If you're as shocked as we are, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to stay updated on our latest deep dives. And don't miss our other videos, like the one about Hollywood's darkest secrets. You won't want to miss it.